Hi everybody and welcome to our free GMATVerbal webinar. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. For those of you who have been to one of our webinars before, we're glad to have you back. My name is Andrew and I'm one of the GMAT advisors here at Ready4. What that means is that I consult with our students, I connect many of them with courses, and I'm thrilled to be leading today's webinar. We'll start with just an overview of the session. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ready4 for those of you who aren't familiar with us. Then I'm going to pass things over and you're going to see a lesson from one of our expert instructors, Sarah. In this lesson, she's going to start with a GMAT overview. Then she's going to dive into some assumptions questions to help you all boost your verbal scores. At the end, I'll jump back on and answer some questions from all of you. So take a minute right now and find the question box. This is going to be an important tool for you today. It should be on your webinar side panel. Any questions that you have about Sarah's lesson, any questions that you have about the GMAT, any questions that you have about our courses, you can feel free to type those right into that question box. Also, when it's time for you to cast your vote as we're going through examples, you can type your answers right in the question box as well. This is going to be an interactive session, so make sure that you type anything that you have in. Julie and I will be at the other end of the question box. We'll be answering all of your questions, so make sure you use us. All right, a little bit about Ready4. Our company is based in Boston, Massachusetts. We were started out of MIT when our founder, Alad Shishan, was earning his MBA at MIT Sloan School of Management. And we've maintained close ties with the people over there at MIT. Our goal back in 2013 when we started was to bring test prep into the 21st century, making test success both more affordable and more accessible to students. And now with over 50,000 five-star reviews in the app stores, we're consistently ranked #1 among test prep apps. And we've helped more than 500,000 students prepare for the GMAT in just the past few years. Today we have a total of 12 apps in the Android and iOS stores. We've been used by more than 2 million students to prepare for tests like the GMAT, the GRE, and the SAT. And our apps have been incredibly effective. On average, our GMAT users are gaining 100 points studying with us. But we've learned that many students need more than just a mobile app to prepare for the tests, because there's no substitute for a live experience with a talented teacher. And that's what you're going to get a taste of today, a little bit of the power of our courses. So speaking of our courses, today's session is going to be led by Sarah. Sarah is a 99th percentile scorer on both the GMAT and the GRE. She has thousands of hours of experience working with students, and students really do love her class. She has very engaging classes, and she does a great job of making sure students are asking lots of questions. So if you enjoyed today's session, make sure you stay after for a few minutes. I'll jump back on. I'll talk a little bit more about our courses. But if during the session you want to hear more about the courses, you can feel free also to type right into the question box and we can talk a little bit more about it. All right, I'm going to pass things over so that you can see Sarah. Best of luck, everyone. Let me know how I can help you. Thanks.
Welcome to our 90 Minutes to a Higher Score presentation. My name is Sarah Dasher, and I will be presenting to you. I've been working with Ready4 for quite some time now, have many thousands of hours of experience teaching people to take the GMAT. I would love to know where everybody is calling in from today. I'm calling in from Texas in the United States. It looks like I've got maybe a familiar name or two, but then a bunch of names I don't recognize. So if you could test out the chat box function that was mentioned earlier, then we will see where you all are calling in from, and I will share the news. Okay, good. Looks like some folks are figuring out their chat box. Okay, we've got someone from Illinois. We've got New Delhi. We've got several from India. We've got someone from Vietnam. That might actually be my first Vietnam that I've seen. Exciting, very welcome to you. Anyone else? Oh, Tashkent. Great. Well, if you want to keep typing in where you're calling in from, there's a Toronto. Okay. We've had many from Toronto over the years. Great. Well, I'm going to get started. We're going to start with just a few minutes. There's a Marlborough, Massachusetts. I actually went to school in Western Mass. We got France. So as you can see, we have people calling in from all over the world, which is pretty typical for our classes. That's one of the neat things about online education is that you get people from all over the place calling in at all different times of day. So this is the test that you're about to take is a very long test, and that's the first thing that I want you all to know. It's a 3-hour test. It costs $250 to take it, so you want to do well. You don't want to have to take it twice. Just to talk to you a little bit about the structure of the exam, it's 3 hours long, like I said, and you've got, you know, roughly split between verbal and quant. You've got even numbers of both. The analytical writing section, you can actually choose when to take the analytical writing section. It is not always first, as it says on the slide. And you can choose, and what you should always do on the GMAT is you should choose to take the most difficult part for you first. So if verbal is easier for you, you should take quant first, and if quant is easier for you, you should take verbal first. And the reason you should do that is because you want to be very focused when you're taking the part that is your weakness. Okay, and since in general, GMAT schools will want to assess your verbal and your quant abilities much more so than your essay. That's why you shouldn't be taking the essay first. After that, you can take things in whatever order pleases you. But again, try to focus your efforts, since it's such a long marathon of a test. Try to focus your efforts on the beginning with the things that you find harder. We've got some other cities that people have called in with. We've got in Nairobi, Kenya. We've got in Austin, Texas. So Carlos, you're not too far down the road from me. That's actually quite a ways, but you're within the same state as me. Cool. So the other thing you should know about the GMAT, other than the fact it's very long and you only want to take it once, which is why I think you're here today, is because if you are going to take a test that costs $250, you don't want to take it more than once, right? You want to get the best score that you can on the first try, because it's painful to take the test and it's painful to study for the test. So let's do the best job that we can to prepare you the first time. The other thing about the GMAT is that it is computer adaptive, and it's computer adaptive by question. I would be interested to know how many of you understand what that means. Can I get some yes and no's? Yes, I understand what a computer adaptive test is, or no, I don't know what a computer adaptive test is. Okay, so the way a computer adaptive test works, okay, cool, yep, we've got some yeses coming in, we've got some no's. The way a computer adaptive test like the GMAT works, it's adaptive by question, and what that means is that the first question that you see will be of medium difficulty. If you get that question right, you will get a harder question. If you get that question right, you'll get another harder question. If you get that one wrong, you'll get an easier question and another easier question until you start getting them right again, okay? The idea here is that you will eventually end up at a score where you are getting them right about half the time. So if you are getting 700 level questions right about half the time, that will be your score. If you're getting 600 level questions right about half the time, then that will be your score. And so the way the algorithm works is that everybody takes a different version of the GMAT based on which questions they get right and wrong throughout the test. Okay. One thing to keep in mind is that not every question counts the same amount. Does anybody know which questions count more on the GMAT? Within the quant section, for example, which questions count more? This is very important to know for your score. Most people will say that the harder questions count more, and that's not right. Nope, easy questions and hard questions all count exactly the same number of points, and that's an important piece of the strategy, okay? The ones that count the most are the ones at the end. They've designed the test that way. It's not a mathematical inevitability. They've just designed the test that way in order to encourage people to finish. So this test strongly rewards people who are clever and fast. So it's really important that you get to the end of your section. You cannot take the GMAT and run out of time. Really bad idea, okay? So what that means is you have to keep your pace throughout the test. You've got 1 minute and 45 seconds for every verbal question. I mean, you've got 65 minutes for the section, but you have approximately 1 minute and 45 seconds for each question. You don't want to go off pace, because if you do, you'll end up at the end running out of time, and those are the questions that count more. So keep that in mind. You got to stick with your pace, and you have to practice your pace. That's one of the reasons it's so important to take GMAT practice tests. And Ready For offers 7 computer adaptive tests for you to practice with. And you should do that because, like I said, you have to get used to the pace of the test so that you don't end up missing a bunch of questions at the end, because they actually count twice as badly for your score. So if you get 5 wrong at the end, that's twice as bad as if you got 5 wrong sprinkled throughout the test. Okay, really important point. So study with the right stuff, because the computer adaptive test is something you have to get used to. So that's what our point 1 here is, leave time at the end of the section. The second point here is you have to ignore the apparent difficulty. And what we mean by that is, most of you are very smart. Sounds like you're savvy about this test. You know that the test gets easier and harder depending on how you're doing. Now that you know that, we want you to forget that, because we can't have you getting distracted and thinking, oh, I got an easier question, that must mean I'm doing badly. You can't get in that frame of mind, okay? You have to just ignore it, because there are some little blips in the algorithm where occasionally you'll get a question right and they'll still give you an easier question, okay? You can't psych yourself out and think, oh no, I'm blowing it, just because you don't have time for that. You have time to answer the questions, not to worry. And then finally, like I'm saying, you got to practice with the right tools and content, not only because of this feature where the last questions count more, but also because the GMAT is totally different than the GRE and the SAT and all those other tests. It has different question types. It has critical reading, or critical reasoning, reading comprehension, sentence corrections, and then on the quant side even, it's got data sufficiencies, which are unique to the test. So you have to be practicing with GMAT questions, not recycled GRE questions, none of that. And that's the other reason that Ready For is a great tool, because we have questions that were designed for the GMAT. It's originally a GMAT company. We come out of the GMAT exam, and so those are the questions you want to work with. And in our courses, we use GMAT Ready For app, but we also use the book that was put out by the company that writes the GMAT. And so we're really, really committed to using only questions that are appropriate for this test. So what we're going to be talking about today is some critical reasoning questions that are based on assumptions. These are the sort of most basic type of critical reasoning questions, which is not to say they're easy, but these are the ones that you have to understand how to do. Assumptions in critical reasoning, we'll be doing assumptions, then the more complex relationships, and then we'll be doing an accept question, okay? So our goals here is that we're going to be able to map how the passages work. Frequently, people will try to answer these critical reasoning questions without really understanding what an argument is, and you have to understand what an argument is in order to evaluate it, okay? We will talk about what a critical reasoning question always does and what it never does. We will practice mapping the passages and finding the assumptions that are made. And then we will apply the process of elimination. And that's true to all types of GMAT questions, not just critical reasoning. Finding the correct answer is not always possible. Finding all the wrong answers is frequently your best option to work your way to what the right answer is. Okay, so then that brings us to this flow chart here. A critical reasoning passage can always be broken into 4 parts. There are premises, there are evidence, assumptions, and a conclusion. What I tell students to do is locate the conclusion first. Although they aren't in every single critical reasoning passage, they're in the vast majority of passages. So finding the conclusion first is really your best idea. Conclusion questions are sometimes at the end, but not always. They can be in the beginning. They're frequently marked by words like therefore, since, thus, hence. Words like that, those are good signals that we might be looking at the conclusion. Therefore, hence, thus. Okay? Those are not always there, but very often there. Okay? And sometimes these conclusion is the end of the passage. Okay? So we're going to locate our conclusion first. Then we are going to locate premises and evidence. The only difference between premises and evidence is that you can't argue with evidence, okay? You can't, if something is a statement of fact, you can't argue with it. Don't waste your time. If something says research shows, something like that, don't argue with whether the research is correct. That's not your job on the GMAT, okay? We're just going to accept it as evidence. However, if something is a premise, that's the author's idea about something. That is going to be prime for attack. Okay, this is the stuff that we're going to be, that's the stuff that we're going to be questioning. Okay, so the premises, and then in the middle we have this thing called assumptions. Now every GMAT passage is going to be written as though the premises and evidence lead inevitably to the conclusion, and that's never the case. That's one thing that critical reasoning passage never does. It's never true that we can go premise to conclusion and be done with it. In the middle there are always these assumptions. And the reason they're in this light gray color here is because they are unstated. In other words, they're not written down. And it's your job is to find these. Okay? You are supposed to find what the assumptions are. And that's the other thing that you are going to attack. Your job is to find these and use them to cast doubt on the author's argument. Okay? So even though it seems like a waste of time, that's why it's very important that we map the parts of the passage. We find the conclusion, we find the premises and evidence, because that is how we're going to locate the assumptions that the author is making and attack the author's argument. Very often people try to answer these questions without even which are about how does this argument work, without understanding what an argument is or how it functions. We can't be doing that. We have to be understanding the pieces of the arguments in order to get them right. So, the critical reasoning passage. So we've got a practice slide here. This is one about Edmund Spenser's parentage. So my task for you is to read this passage and tell me what is the conclusion. Now what I'm going to be doing is I will underline some portions here, and I would like you to tell me, and I'll put a letter above it, and I'd like you to tell me which letter do you think is the conclusion in this passage, okay? I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes to do that. The reason I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes is because for critical reasoning passages, we usually say that you have about 2 minutes and 30 seconds per question. Okay? 2 minutes and 30 seconds per question. Now, you might remember that I said you've got 1 minute and 45 per question overall in the verbal. That's because we've got also sentence corrections. There are other types of questions that take less time. These critical reasoning questions, they're hard. And so we allot more time for them. So I'm going to say you got about 2 minutes and 30 seconds per question. I'm going to give you 1 minute and 30 to read this passage and understand what the conclusion is, with the idea that when we get to the multiple choice piece, you'll still need 1 minute to actually pick your answer after you read the passage, okay? So again, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds. And as you're reading, I will underline pieces of this passage, and I want you to tell me which letter is the conclusion, okay? So this is a stopwatch that I use in all my classes. And you've got 1 minute and 30 seconds. Your time starts now. Okay, so that's 1 minute and 30 seconds. What do people think is the answer? Okay, we've got to vote for E. We've got to vote for D. Another D. Another E. Got an F. Okay, so It looks like you guys are focusing in on the end of the passage, and very often the conclusion will be at the end of the passage. I just don't want you to think that it always has to be. So you're right, it is either D or E or F, which are the ones that, so nobody's interested in A, B, or C, and you're correct, okay? We do, however, have a pretty important clue at the beginning of the passage. If you were going to summarize here, if you were going to cut out every other sentence in this passage, what would the point be? If you were going to cut out every other sentence in this passage, which one would you keep? Well, I would look at the introduction here and say, although there is no record of Edmund Spencer's parentage, that means parents, okay? So that means this passage is going to be about who is Ed Spencer's parent, okay? They tell us right up front that it's going to be about Ed Spencer's parents. Okay, so now let's go back and we get some evidence here. We know that he's attended the Merchant Taylor School. Now, is that a premise or is that evidence? That's evidence, right? Because we can't dispute that. They're telling us that he did this. This is evidence. Okay. Records indicate that Merchant Taylors Guild then had only 3 members named Spencer. Okay, we got records from this time indicate. So again, this is evidence. We're not going to argue with that. They tell us there are records of it. That's also evidence. It lists the names of the 3 men who worked there. Then we get to the statement, the last was likely the least affluent of the 3. Is this statement an evidence or is it premise? Evidence or premise? Is this a fact or is this the author's opinion? It is Russell, yeah. So Russell's saying premise, okay? And exactly, it is because it says he was likely. So that shows that there's an opinion being used here, okay? Yeah, so this here is premise. We also know that it's not really the conclusion because this passage is going to be about who's Ed Spencer's parent. And this is just telling us that this guy named John is not well off, is not rich. Okay. Then we get a statement E, most likely Edmund's father. This is looking like our conclusion, right? Because this directly relates to who is Ed Spencer's parent. Okay, so E is going to be my first choice so far, but let's look at F. Since school accounting records list Edmund as a scholar who attended the school at the reduced fee. Well, this is fine too. Okay, but this is really evidence, right? It's evidence. We have a record that shows that it's the case. Okay. Another way to think of this is that you don't need an elaborately constructed argument to prove something that is just a fact, right? If an accounting record shows it, we don't need an argument to support it. We only need an argument to support something that could be doubted. Okay, and so here we only have a few things that could be doubted. One of them is this bit about whether the man is poor or not. And the other one is that he's most likely Edmund's father. Those are the 2 things that are not facts. And which one is the conclusion? E is the conclusion here, because that's the one that really relates to the subject of this passage. Okay, so this is how picking out the pieces of the argument can help us arrive at the actual answer of what is the conclusion. Okay. It's important to understand the pieces and what is evidence, what is a premise, what is a conclusion. Okay, so moving on from there, this is just the same passage, bigger, same thing. We will move on to a little side note here. There are some words that will be used on the GMAT because it's a business exam, particularly they tend to do with finance, that have what I would say is directional meanings. Something where they're combining things that have sort of oppositional meanings, like profit, which is a combination of revenue and expenses. Oh, we have a question on the last one. E has the word likely to. Can opinions be conclusions? Yes, that's what I'm saying, is that those opinions, a conclusion is an opinion, right? You got some evidence to support it, and that's leading to your opinion that John Spencer is Ed Spencer's parents. And the reason that we liked E as the conclusion and not D here, the reason E, even though it has the word likely in it, is the conclusion, is because, again, it relates back to this initial statement that, oh, this is going to be a passage about who is Ed Spencer's parent. And you can also use the test that I mentioned where if you think about this whole passage, if you had to get rid of everything except one sentence, the author's point here is that John Spencer is Ed Spencer's father. And here's a bunch of reasons why, right? And so the conclusion is that John Spencer is Ed Spencer's father. This part about him being most likely Edmund's father, okay? Yeah, so these things that have opinions in them, those can be conclusions. The statements of fact cannot be conclusions because, of course, you don't need an argument to support a fact. At least not in the world of GMAT. So again, back to this thing about profit and fiscal deficit. So here, the word profit can be a little tricky in this exam because it means two oppositional things, right? Money in versus money out. Okay, and fiscal deficit. So that's a combination of a country's expenditures versus its income. So money in, money out. The reason that this is complicated is particularly when it comes to questions about strengthening and weakening the argument. You know, it can be very easy to get mixed up, to be backwards about, wait, is this proving the author's point or opposing the author's point? So it's useful to know some of these terms, just know them. Know what profit is, know what deficit is, just so you have one less thing to get confused about. Okay, so here we have an example of something that works that way. This is about the nation's trade deficit, okay? What I would like you to do is tell me what is the conclusion. And again, I'll give you a minute and a half. And this time, though, I'm not going to underline. Just tell me which part of this passage is the conclusion, okay? So you got a minute and a half, and your time starts now. Okay, it looks like people are focusing in on this last sentence, okay? And that's great. So I totally agree with you that the sentence beginning with "this should result in" is where the conclusion is. Now, we're going to get a little bit more sophisticated here. If you're choosing between this and this, and I'll label them A and B, which is the conclusion? Okay, great. So we're having people are evenly split on this, it looks like. And you know, so this is tricky. You may have in your studying come across the term an intermediate conclusion. I don't know if you've come across this, but there's an intermediate conclusion, an IC, and a final conclusion. One of these is the intermediate conclusion, and the other one is the final conclusion. They can be in either order. You know, it's not necessarily true, like I said, that the final conclusion comes at the end. The way to test which is the intermediate conclusion and the final conclusion is you think about it both ways. Are we saying that production will become cheaper, so more goods will become available on the market? Is it A, comma, so B? Or is it B, comma, so A? Whatever is the last term here, that is your final conclusion. Which one is it? So which is the final conclusion, A or B? Yes, Yes, very nice. Yes, good, everybody. Yes, it's B, exactly. Yeah. So, and this isn't important in every question, but sometimes you do need to do this level of detail where you say, is it this, then this, or that, then that? And so in this case, that's true. Production will become cheaper, which will increase the amount of goods available on the global market. Exactly. So it is A, so B. So B is the final conclusion. Okay. Nice work, guys. That's very, very good. Okay. I also want to use this passage as one of my favorites to point out the ideas of assumptions. Okay, so now that we've identified the conclusion, like I said, let's take a look at the premises and the evidence here. So I'm going to delete some of this stuff so we have a little more space to work with. And this is a fun one because I always get such great answers from people when I ask about the assumptions that are being made here. So we know what our conclusion is. Is more goods will be available on global market. Okay. Now we want to ask ourselves, why does the author think that? And these are your premises and your premises and evidence. And it's not necessarily that important to separate them, but why does the author think that? And this is where we build the argument like the author's doing it. And the way I like to do it is I start at the top with the first sentence, and I just work through and I write things down. Okay, so in order to reduce the nation's trade deficit, the government is offering tax incentives to the manufacturing sector. So my first piece of the argument is government is offering tax incentives. Okay, the next sentence, tax incentives will compensate for hiring more workers. Okay, then we have this sort of intermediate conclusion here. Production will get cheaper for manufacturers. So, and that's when we get down here, more goods will be available on the global market. Now, what I've left here, so this is the argument that the author is making. What I've left in here is a big white space, and this here is where the assumptions go. Okay, this is where we're going to put our assumptions. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you is, what are the assumptions? It's just because the government is offering tax incentives to pay for workers, does that mean necessarily that we'll get more goods on the global market? Well, no, there's a lot of things that, you know, could change that could make that not happen. And your goal in this test is to think about what some of those will be. Yeah, okay, so we've got one, well, I'll keep track of our assumptions over here. Good, we've got some rolling in, please start suggesting. So one of them is that tax incentives will increase hiring. Okay, that they will use the tax incentives to hire more workers. You know, maybe they don't want more workers. maybe there's no space. Maybe their limitation is not their workforce, but actually the capacity of their machines. Okay, so absolutely, we don't know necessarily tax incentives will increase hiring. Okay, yeah, another one is that more workers will equal more production. That's not true. You know, if you hire a bunch of lazy workers, that won't work. Or like I said, what if the limitation is how much machinery you have to manufacture and not necessarily the number of people that you have? Absolutely. Okay, so then we can move on to this sentence here. This should result in production becoming cheaper. Okay. Production will get cheaper with more workers. That's not necessarily true. You know, sometimes when companies grow and get more employees, they're under more government scrutiny and actually becomes expensive. You know, I worked in the oil industry and that became true that little companies actually operate much more cheaply than big companies because big companies are under more scrutiny. So totally. Trade will match production. Yeah, and then we get into this bit about production becoming cheaper for manufacturers, increasing the amount of goods available in the global market. Well, we're also assuming that the goods will be sold on the global market. That could be a question of supply or demand, okay, or the international markets will want the product. Okay, you know, so there's all kinds of assumptions that are being made here, and that is your job on the GMAT, is to identify the weaknesses in the argument. Like what could be What could the author be jumping to as a conclusion? This jump is the jump to a conclusion. Your job is to find the holes. Okay. Cool. And again, that's why it's important to break down the argument so that you can go line by line and say, okay, the government's offering tax incentives. Well, that's actually a piece of evidence, so I'm not going to waste my time trying to come up with a problem there. But tax incentives will compensate for hiring more workers. Well, is that necessarily true? No, that's an assumption. It's also an assumption that more workers will equal more production. Then there's production will get cheaper for manufacturers. Is that necessarily true? No, that's not true at all. Okay, so we can go through line by line after we've broken it down and find the problems with the argument. Okay, so we get to this thing about accept questions. Now, these are mind-bendingly difficult. They're really the same questions, but what the accept questions are just ones where they say all of the following are true except. Each of the following strengthens the argument except, things like that. It's just the ones that literally have the word except in the question, okay? The thing that I want you to keep track of here is that whether you are dealing with a regular question or an accept question, you'll have 5 answer choices. 4 of them will be in the same realm, and then you'll have the one odd man out, right? You'll have the one answer that's not like the others. So in the case of an accept question, it'll be, everything is true except this one. And in the case of a straightforward question, it'll be everything is false except this one. So you're always going to have 4 out of 5 that are kind of similar and then one weird one. Okay? And so let's not lose track of that, because again, these can be very confusing to think about. But in the end, what you're looking for is the weird one that doesn't match. Okay? So let's take a look at an example here. This is a little bit of an unusual one because all they're telling us up front is they're telling us about the idea of benchmarking. Okay? So what they're saying here is they're telling us what benchmarking is. And benchmarking is the idea that the manager of a company will compare him or herself to other companies to determine whether they're doing things right or not. That's the meaning of the word benchmarking. Now we get to this question here. The way they phrase the question is just horrible. Any of the following, if true, is a valid reason for benchmarking the performance of a company against companies with which it is not in competition rather than against competitors except. Oh, there's so many nots and againsts and excepts. They've phrased it in a very confusing way, and they've done that deliberately. So the first thing to do is to just try and simplify this question. Take a minute to just simplify what they're asking here and get rid of as many nots and againsts and everything as you can when you're writing it. So I'm going to try to write this in as simple terms as I can think of. And again, it's okay to take some time to do this. It will pay off. Any of the following, if true, we don't need that, is a valid reason. Okay, we're looking for good, valid reason for benchmarking the performance of a company. Okay, I'm just going to say, comparing a company. So valid reason for comparing a company against companies with which it is not in competition. So a valid reason for comparing a company to a totally different company, not a competitor. Well, you want to avoid using the word not, actually. So I'm just going to say to a totally different company. So a company it's not in competition with, rather than against competitors. Okay, so I've just simplified this sentence quite a lot, and I've said, or the question, quite a lot. So we're looking for valid reasons to compare a company to a totally different company rather than competitor. Put that in parentheses. Except. Okay, so now that I've simplified it, I can also look at this and say, okay, if it's a valid reason except, what I'm really looking for is the not valid reason. Okay. So you see how you can negate the statement like that? If you don't like to do it that way, the other thing, like I said, is you just read all 5 of them and you decide which one argues differently than the others. Okay. It's just going to be the odd man out. But I'm going to say we're looking for the one that's not a valid reason. Okay. Or alternatively, you could say a valid reason for not comparing a company to a totally different company. That would be another. And I'm going to keep my not up front. Okay, looks like some people are already answering. So I'm going to give you, let's take a minute and a half to look at these answers, or actually maybe more like a minute, okay? So take a minute to look at these and see what you think the answer is, and then in a minute, I will show you how I would eliminate them. Okay, a minute, and your time starts now. Okay, so it looks like we're getting some votes for C. We're getting some votes for E. We're getting an A. So we got people all over the map here. So let's look here. Comparisons, we'll start with A. Oh, we got a D, so it's everybody. Okay, comparisons with competitors are most likely to focus on practices that the manager making the comparisons already employs. Okay, so here they're saying if you compare with a competitor, meaning a similar company, are most likely to focus on practices the manager making comparisons already employs. So this is saying if you compare yourself to a similar company, you aren't going to learn anything, right? You'll focus on practices the manager already uses. In other words, we won't learn anything. So then again, we're looking for reasons to compare to a different company. This is arguing that it doesn't work to compare yourself to a similar company. In other words, that we should compare ourselves to a totally different company. So this one's out. Okay, another way to think about this would be to say, okay, this is arguing for, if you look at this and you say, okay, this is arguing for a different company, right? If you compare yourself to a similar company, you won't learn anything, so this is arguing for a different company. Okay, so let's look at B. Getting inside information about the unique practices of competitors is particularly difficult. Okay, once again, it's very hard to get information about similar companies. In other words, we should be looking at different companies. C, since companies that compete with each other are likely to have comparable levels of efficiency, only benchmarking against non-competitors will reveal practices that would aid in beating competitors. So in other words, this one is arguing for comparing yourself to a different type of company. D, managers are generally more receptive to new ideas that they find outside their own industry. So again, we're worried about a different company. Finally, we get to E, and I hope E is going to be the other way, right? Because again, the odd man out is the one we're interested in. And right now we have 4 statements that all argue in favor of a different, comparing yourself to different types of companies. E says much of the success of good companies is due to their adoption of practices that take advantage of the special circumstances of their products or markets. So what this is saying is that a good company, like let's take Coca-Cola, is due to their adoption of practices that take advantage of the special circumstances of their products or markets. So in other words, Coca-Cola is a good company because they have a good Coke recipe. Okay? If you run a tire company or, you know, a landscaping business, you're not going to learn anything from studying Coca-Cola, right? Because Coca-Cola is good because of their recipe. The tire company is good because of their tires. So this is arguing in favor of looking at companies that are similar. If you're Pepsi, you might learn something from Coke. If you're Firestone, you might learn something from Ferrari tires, okay? But in any case, this is arguing for a same company. So if we just look down the list, it doesn't matter if this is an accept or a not or an against or whatever. What we know is that E is different from the other 4, and therefore it must be the answer. okay? So that is how you handle an accept question. Just remember that the strange one is the answer in, you know, in any type of question, but in accept questions, it's easier to locate if you just think of it that way. Okay. All right, so now we're just going to kind of go rapid fire through some examples, and I'm going to talk a lot less. Okay, we're going to start with some easier questions, and we'll move on to harder ones. All right. So this one, I think we say this one is approximately a 500 level question, I think. And then we'll work to some harder ones, okay? But I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes on this one. Remember to locate your conclusion, then locate your premises, and then pick your answer, okay? So you got 2.5 minutes, and your time starts now. That's 1:30. You have 1 minute left. Fifteen seconds. Okay, that's 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So what I've written up here is I went through the passage and I picked out the conclusion. The conclusion here, it has one of our key words. It has the word therefore in it. So that makes it a little easier to identify. It's also at the end. So the conclusion the author's coming to here is that the least disruptive way to collect student loans is to increase the student's monthly payment. So then I went back and I said, why does the author think that? That's kind of a silly thing to say, but the author thinks that because the government wants their loan money back, and the laws prevent them from raising the interest rate, okay? So they can't raise the interest rate and get more money that way. So they're just going to increase how much the students pay every month and get the money back faster. Now, as you're reading that, you might think, well, that's kind of silly, right? There are laws protecting the interest rate, but then the government can just go and like say, well, you have to pay us our whole loan back tomorrow, but we won't raise your interest rate. That seems a little funny, right? So automatically I would be sort of thinking, gosh, maybe there's something, maybe one of the assumptions here is that they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to say, we want all our money back now and increase the student's monthly payment. So I would be looking out for answers like that. But let's go through our answer choices, and we are going to use the process of elimination now to go from the worst answer to eventually the best answer. So if we go through here, the worst answers, if we look at, so people pick C and D, so we'll hold on to those. A, let's look at A. Legislators in the state of Vitulia have set themselves against all student loan collections regardless of the economic cost. Well, this doesn't answer the question, right? this is all about how they're going to get their money back. So, you know, the assumption here is certainly not that they don't want to get the money back. This is really the opposite. This doesn't make any sense at all. So let's get rid of A. B, the rate of student loan repayment would not increase in the state of Vitulia if interest rate payments were increased in proportion to loan duration. Okay, so once again, we don't even need to consider it because remember, it's against the law to raise the interest rate payments. So we don't even need to think about this one. We're not allowed to do that. That was one of their laws preventing it, so let's not even consider B. So then we get to C and D, which people did like. Legislators in the state of Vitulia are eager for the government to collect student loans. Okay, once again, this is not an assumption. This is a statement of fact. Okay, the government wants the money back. Yeah, and again, it's also not a conclusion. This is just statements of feelings. Like the government is eager to. They are not correct. Okay, no feelings. We don't bring those into. And obviously, if the government spokesman is, we say government spokesman at the beginning here, if they're talking about how to get the loan money back, then they want the money back. We don't need to cast doubt on that, okay? D, local legislators want student loans to be recouped by the least traumatic means possible. Again, this is all about feelings, right? Okay? If they're and also they're telling us the least disruptive way, then obviously they're trying to get the money back in a not traumatic way. So again, it's not D for two reasons. We already know it's the least disruptive way, and also we're not going to be tempted by feelings, how people feel about an issue. Feelings don't come into the GMAT. E, legislators in the state of Vitulia have not also promised to keep student loan payment requirements stable. So here we are, right? We have assumed in this argument that although they can't raise interest rate, they can raise the monthly payment. And that's what this is saying. We're assuming that the legislators haven't promised to keep loan payments stable. In other words, we're assuming that they can raise student loan payments. Okay, if they're not keeping them stable, then they can raise them. And that is an assumption of this argument, okay, that they are allowed to do that. Okay, so the answer to this one is E. Let us move on to the next one. Once again, this is a 500 level. This one I think people tend to find a little bit easier than the Vitulia passage. Okay, this is about a 500 level. I think you'll read this one and think, this doesn't make much sense at all. Okay, so you got, once again, you got 2.5 minutes. Find your conclusion. One thing I want to point out here is a little bit different because this question is asking you for an alternative explanation. Okay, these two words, you will probably, I guess, come down to two choices in the end. And you want to find the one that is an alternative explanation. Okay, all right, so you got 2.5 minutes and your time starts now. That's 1.5 minutes. You have a minute left. You got 15 seconds. Okay, all right, looks like we've been getting some votes for D and some votes for A. So what I have done here is I've picked out the conclusion here. And the conclusion here is basically that if a gym patron remembers how much he or she paid for a pass, they're more likely to use it. That makes sense, right? Why does the author think that? The author thinks that because individual buyers show up 90% of the time, 99% of the time, and pass buyers show up 25% of the time. Now, again, these are evidence, so we're not going to bother messing around with these. Evidence is evidence. We're not going to waste our time casting doubt on this evidence. So they're asking for is an alternative explanation. So the conclusion that the author comes to is, okay, so individual buyers show up 99% of the time, pass buyers only show up a quarter of the time. Clearly, the reason the individual pass buyers show up is because they remember how much they paid. They just paid for it, okay? So let's go through our options. Nobody liked B, C, or E, I think. So let's look at those first. Many people who visit the gym don't continue to attend regularly for longer than 3 months. Yep, not right. Again, this does seem to be relevant because it talks about a pass, but it's introducing a detail that we don't care about. You should be very suspicious of answers that name a time frame that's not mentioned, okay? This is irrelevant, okay? It's irrelevant whether they show up for 3 months or 5 months or 1 month. Little details like this are your sign that that answer is wrong, so we'll cross it out. Those who attended all 5 classes become eligible to win a gift certificate. Okay, this is wrong because it's the opposite, right? If people who go 5 in a row get a gift certificate, well, then you'd expect pass buyers to show up more. So this is the opposite. Another very common wrong answer choice on these is to pick one that is relevant, but is actually the opposite of true, okay? Most of the time, people who bought an individual pass did so immediately before each class they attended. Well, this makes sense. I like this answer because this seems to say that the reason individual pass buyers show up is because, of course, you're at the gym to buy a pass in order to use it right then. You know, it's not like many people show up, buy a pass for a gym, and then leave, right? The only way you do that is if you bought a package. So this one seems to be very relevant. Let me get to E. There is sometimes not enough equipment for people who arrive just before class begins. Again, they're talking about the amount of equipment. This passage is not about that. It's irrelevant. You should be very focused on this test on the details that are in front of you. Things that bring in details from the outside more often than not are wrong. So try to stay very focused on what the subject of this passage is. In this case, passes and whether people buy them. This whole equipment thing, it's irrelevant. So we cross it out. So now we're down to A and D, which are the answer choices that those of you who reported liked. The price of each pass was slightly cheaper for those who bought all 5 passes ahead of time, or most of the time people bought individual passes did so immediately before the class they attended. Both of these are relevant, okay? But let's look at A. The price of each pass was cheaper for those who bought all 5 passes ahead of time. Okay, well, that's right. In other words, people paid less for the package, so they didn't feel like they had to show up. Totally correct. However, it's not an alternative explanation. This supports the given conclusion. It's not an alternative. Okay? So A is a very tempting answer, but that's why I highlight the fact that we want an alternative explanation. And you should keep your eye out for those on the test. When they look for an alternative explanation, you will probably have 2 choices that you like in the end, but one of them is just going to support the argument that's there. The other one will be the alternative explanation. Okay, so the answer to this guy is D. All right, so now we get to this guy. This is a 600 level. You have 2.5 minutes, and your time starts now. That's a minute and a half. You have a minute left. You have 15 seconds left. Okay, so that's 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Looks like we got some folks who liked D and some folks who liked E. Again, I went through and I said, all right, what is the conclusion that the author is coming to here? The author is coming to the conclusion that VC firms don't know how their investments are doing a lot of the time, okay? Why do they think that? Well, they think that because startups have to act optimistic, okay? So VC firms pump millions of dollars in, but then startups, optimism and positivity are keys to success in the startup industry. So startups must act optimistic to be successful, okay? So no startup wants to admit that they are on their way towards failure. So I guess I could also write here that startups don't want to let on that they're failing. That makes sense, right? So what is the assumption that's being made here? Well, immediately I might say, like, wait a second, you mean VC firms, the only way they know what's going on is if their startups tell them? That doesn't seem very smart. It seems like they should have some sort of like outside influence, because of course the company that you're investing in is going to act like everything is great, right? So, but that's what I'm going to have my eyes out for. But let's look through our answer choices. Starting with A, most startups have a transparent management hierarchy. Okay, well, first off, I'm not sure this is totally relevant because we're not interested in how transparent their hierarchy is. We're interested in how transparent their earnings are, or, you know, that kind of thing. And furthermore, if they were transparent, then you'd think that the VC firms would know exactly what's going on. So this is somewhere between irrelevant and opposite. I'm not exactly sure, but it's definitely opposite. So that's not right. So let me get to B. Startups should be rewarded for accurately reporting problems to investors. Okay, shoulds. Nope, not should, never. Okay, not should. Okay, we don't want to talk about what startups should or shouldn't do. It's not what they're asking. They're asking why VC firms don't know how their investments are doing. So that one's out. C, the threat of failure is always good for startups. Since it helps them maintain their focus. So there are a few things that are wrong with statement C. One of them is this use of the word always. This is too extreme. Another comment and answer type here, things that are too extreme. They use the word always, never, all, those things. Too extreme. We don't like those. Since it helps them, and furthermore, all this is doing is talking about what startups should or shouldn't do. It doesn't even address the idea of why VC firms would know how the company's doing. So this one is out too. It's too extreme and it's also irrelevant. So now we're down to D and E, which are the choices that you guys narrowed it down to, which is good. Investors obtain information about the startup from no other source than the startup itself. Now this points to what I was mentioning before, which is that in order for this argument to work, startups don't say when they're failing, so VC firms never know. We are assuming that the VC firm has no other way, has no like spies or anything telling them, by the way, the company you invested is doing badly. So D is very tempting to me at this point, but I will look at E. Some investors are less concerned with the truth about the startup's management than about results. Okay. Some investors are less concerned with the truth about a startup's management than about results. Well, again, we're interested in results, right? Some investors, you know, we're interested in why VC firms don't know what they're doing. Okay, so you might, I guess, say that because the VC firms are more interested in startups management than they are about the results, maybe they don't like go and investigate the results. But again, that's not nearly as close an explanation as, well, the VC firms just clearly should have other sources of information other than the startups themselves. So the answer to this, guys, D. Okay, so we have one last question here. This movie theater question. Oh boy, this one's tough. Okay. So we're going to do this one last question, and after that, I will pass things back to the Ready For team to do Q&A. So any questions that you have about GMAT, MBA programs, folks in the Ready For team will be around to answer, and I will lurk in the background and answer questions too if you've got any lingering questions for me. Okay, but let's do this last question first. This is a tough one. This is very much a 700 level. You've got 2.5 minutes, and your time starts now. Minute 30, you have a minute left. Okay, you have 15 seconds left. Okay, so that is 2 minutes and 30 seconds. We got some answers for A and some answers for D. So what I've done here is I've picked out the conclusion and the why. Okay, that was more was for A. Okay. The conclusion that I picked out here is that installing a snack bar isn't in everyone's best interest. Okay. Why does the author think that? The author thinks that because if they build a snack bar, people will bring more snacks into the theater. And then more snacks in the theater means the furniture will get dirty more quickly. So what are the assumptions that are being made here? First off, no one wants dirty furniture. Okay. But also, so one assumption is that if we build a snack bar, there will be more snacks in the theater. Okay. That's assuming that people will actually buy stuff there. Okay. And also that greater number of snacks means more stains, like more stains and more dirty furniture. Okay, so I would say there are two assumptions here, and they may seem obvious, but they do become important when you look at your answer choices here. So we're assuming that the snack bar will actually bring in more snacks, and also that more snacks will mean the furniture. You know, you could doubt the fact that, like, you know, once one person spills a giant soda on your theater furniture, somebody spilling a second soda doesn't really make it any worse, you know? So let's look at our answer choices here. I'm going to skip A because people liked it. So we'll find, let's start with B. The amount of snacks that most theater patrons consume doesn't cause the furniture to become dirty. Oh, well, what's the problem there? This is a common answer type that we can recognize now. This is opposite, right? If snacks aren't a problem, then if they don't make the furniture dirty, then let's put a snack bar in. So that one's out. It's opposite. C, the theater will probably be cleaner if snacks are banned completely than if patrons are only permitted to have one snack. Well, first off, patrons are permitted to have one snack. If they ban them completely, we're not talking about banning it completely. We're talking about whether to put in a snack bar or not. So this is proposing a hypothetical situation that we're not even addressing in this passage. So it was out. This one is irrelevant. D, patrons will not simply bring snacks from home if the snack bar is not installed in the lobby. Well, let's look at our assumptions here. There is this, right? This kind of ties back to this idea that the snack bar will result in more snacks in the theater. If people are already bringing their snacks from home, it doesn't matter if they put in a snack bar or not. You know, if people are going to bring in a pizza either way, it doesn't matter if they put in the snack bar. So D, I think we have to keep in. Let's look at E. The theater's primary concern should be to maintain a clean environment. Okay. Again, this does sort of address this no one wants dirty furniture assumption. It does sort of address that it's important to have a clean theater. But again, this word should. We want to be very suspicious of value judgments. No value judgments. Okay, we don't like the word should. We should stay away from it, just like we did in those previous passages. Okay, so no, E is out for that reason. So let's go back to A, which some of you liked. If a snack bar were placed in the lobby, patrons would consume more snacks in the theater as a result. Okay, so this does address this assumption that the snack bar will result in more snacks in the theater. So it does sort of depend on this, okay? But if we look at our choices between A and D, D says that we will not simply bring snacks from home if the snack bar is not installed in the lobby. So that's pretty compelling. So go back to A. If a snack bar were placed in the lobby, people would consume more snacks in the theater as a result. Okay, well, that's okay, but again, we haven't addressed this idea that a greater number of snacks means more stays, right? Whether they consume a lot more snacks or the same number of snacks doesn't address the problem of the dirty furniture. And so here, the answer is D. That's really the only one that addresses this particular assumption. Because again, if D is not true, then the argument does not hold. Okay, so the answer to this guy is D. So that is it for our example questions. At the end of every lesson, if you sign up for a GMAT course with us, we will have homework that addresses the subject matter that we've covered that day. Here, the questions in the Ready For app are assumptions, and we've got 3 problem sets there. Also, we assign questions from the GMAT official guide. And so you can see here, they're taken from the GMAT official guide 2018, and here are the questions that are relevant to what we've done today. So if you happen to own this book, then you can also do these questions as further practice. Now, if you've got any questions for me, I will accept those. But other than that, I'm going to turn things back to the Ready For team, and they will handle questions about MBA programs, GMAT, anything that you have stuck around to ask us. So thanks very much for your attention. Really appreciate you calling in today from all over the world to listen to this. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in a future class.
Okay, I'm back. Hopefully you all took a lot away from the session today. If you did, you're going to learn so much more in our courses. At this time, if you have any questions, feel free to type them right into the question box. Yeah, good question. So Mike wants to know, how many practice tests should he take? I would say take at least 3. A practice test is going to be, a great way for you to simulate the conditions that you're facing on the exam. And when I usually tell students as you're practicing, that's very important, because even if you're not someone who has a lot of test anxiety, the more you practice, the more comfortable you're going to get, especially when it comes to the time component of the exam. It's going to enable you to focus a little bit more on the content of the exam rather than, on your surroundings or on the format or on the timing. In terms of full-length practice tests, I usually say take one early on. Take one about a month away from the exam, and take one about 2 weeks away from the exam. These are going to help you just to know where you stand, but also to make sure that you're focusing on the areas that you really need to focus on with the limited time that you have. Good question. And if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in. I can make sure that I answer them, and if I don't get to them, I'll stay after at the end and answer your questions. Some frequently asked questions we get about the GMAT. The first, when can I take the GMAT? So you can take the test any day except for Sundays and holidays, as long as there's a test center near you that has an open seat. The cost of the GMAT is $250. How long do I need to prep for the GMAT? So you'll get some different answers here. Most people will agree somewhere between a month and a half and 6 months. Really, it totally depends on how much time per week you're able to study. So, you know, like I said, take that practice test early on, get an idea of what your baseline score is. I would do your homework, figure out what the target score is going to be for the programs that you're hoping to apply to. And then it's all about having a consistent study schedule. So one of the nice things about our courses is that we cover every topic that you need to know for the exam. We take all the guesswork out, making sure that you don't have to worry about trying to figure out what's important and what's not. We're going to cover everything. So we end up saving students a lot of time. When do I need to take the GMAT in terms of MBA program deadlines? So most schools are going to have multiple rounds of admissions. The first round is going to be in September or October for admissions in the following fall. But do your homework, figure out what the schools that you're applying to, what are their deadlines, and then go from there. How high do I need to score? So this chart is just the sampling of top 50 MBA programs, and it's showing you that that average GMAT scores are going up. And you can see here from an average anywhere between 5 points and 25 points. And so it is getting more and more competitive. GMAT scores are getting higher. You can see that Stanford 737 is just a very, very competitive GMAT pool. What is the value of a great GMAT score? This is just showing you the top programs and what the annual dollars per 10 GMAT points is. I tell students, don't think of the GMAT just as something to check off as you're applying to business schools. It should be something that you're intentional about. Commit to it. See this as the first step to the next step in your career. And so when you think of it that way, it enables you to really, focus a little bit more, have the end goal in mind, and know that, there is a lot riding on your GMAT. Okay, upcoming courses. So we have different courses totally based on what your needs are. Our most popular option is our hybrid course. We also have our live online course, which gets really great ratings and we've helped so many students with. And we also have private tutoring for students who are looking for something a little bit more personalized. And all of these options are going to guarantee you're going to gain at least 70 points with us. And let me explain how they work. So both of our complete courses, the live and the hybrid, are going to have 24 hours of instruction broken down into 8 classes. With the hybrid course, we upload the sessions on a schedule so that you can view them completely at your own pace. And we assign relevant homework from our top-rated mobile and web platforms and from the GMAT official guide. Now, as you're viewing the lessons, as you're doing the homeworks, if you have questions, you can either email them to your coach and instructor for the course, or you can save them for the live small group tutoring hours. You get 4 live small group tutoring hours with both the hybrid and the live courses. With the live course, all of those sessions are going to be completely live. On weeknights, they take place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and on weekends, they take place at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Other than that, all of the features are exactly the same. So both options, because you're going to be getting lifetime access to all the recordings and to the apps, both options are very flexible. You're getting a ton of support from both of those options, and you're working with a 99th percentile scoring instructor. Now, in addition to your instructor for the course, you're going to have a coach for this course, Julie. Julie has 15 years of relevant experience herself. She's a great resource for any questions that you have about the GMAT, any logistical questions, and she's going to be tracking your progress in the apps throughout the courses. So what is included? When you sign up for this course, you are going to be getting lifetime access to our top-rated mobile and web apps. You are going to get lifetime access to the recordings. You are going to have 7 full-length computer adaptive tests, which is a great feature to help you know kind of where you stand as you're preparing for this test. And then with any of our complete courses, you're going to have a free profile evaluation with Ready4's MBA admissions expert. We know that while a GMAT score is very important, it's just a piece of the puzzle of getting into your top programs. And so having that chance to meet with an MBA admissions expert we're going to tell you a little bit more about how to build your personal brand and how to set yourself apart from other candidates. So here you can see our courses for the 4th and 5th weeks of May. You can see that our next complete live course is going to be starting on May 30th. That's going to be a 6-week course, and it's going to meet on Wednesdays and Saturdays. All of our complete live courses, we have 4-week options and 8-week options based on what your needs are, based on what your timeline is. The 4-week courses, we upload 2 classes a week, and with the 8-week courses, we upload 1 class a week. If you are looking for more options, you don't see one that fits for you here, you can go right to our website, readyfor.com, and you're going to find the complete list of upcoming courses. Okay, so here's an example of an 8-week course schedule. All of our hybrid courses are led by Richard Schwartz. He has 15 years of experience teaching the GMAT, and he has a perfect 800 score. Students really love him. They love the pace that he sets for the course, and he's definitely going to help you to set a very methodical approach to the GMAT, making sure that you're tackling this test with a strategy. So you can see the 8-week course means that 1 day a week we upload those sessions. Each of those sessions is 3 hours long. It's nice that you can view with the hybrid, and with the live too. If you're looking at the recordings, you can rewind it, you can go back, rewatch. It's a great way for you to, when something comes up, if you have any issues while you're doing the homeworks, just go back, rewatch the parts that you were struggling with, and that support is always going to be there. Okay, we have a special discount just to say thank you for attending our webinar today. All webinar attendees are going to be able to use the code webinar200 at checkout, and that's going to give you 20% off all of our hybrid or live complete courses. So it's webinar200, all capitals, webinar20, and that's going to give you 20% off, webinar20. Okay, let me finish with this. Why should you pick Ready For and not another company? And the answer is that we're not just creating courses here at Ready For. What we're doing is we're building technology combined with the best instructors and the best content to help students learn faster and smarter, maximizing their potential and hitting target scores more effectively so that you can get into the schools of your dreams. We embrace digital technology here at Ready For better than any other company, and allowing you to learn wherever, whenever. We're leveraging all of the data that we have in-house. We have millions of hours of data based on students studying using our apps, and that enables you to prepare the best way for you with our learning algorithm. We're making sure that you're focusing on the concepts that you're struggling with most. Because everything we do is online, we're able to do it a lot more cheaply than other companies, making us the most affordable test prep you're going to find in the industry when it comes to top quality test prep. We don't have to worry about things like renting out college classrooms for in-person courses. We don't worry about printing out paper-bound textbooks. All of this enables us to, not only is it a strategy that's more effective for our learners, but enables us to charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars less than other companies as well. And because we only work with the best instructors in the industry, you know that you're always going to be in good hands. Finally, we love what we do here at Ready For. We are founded on the idea of helping students to increase their scores and get into their dream schools. And we always are hearing back from students who say that not only our apps, but our courses help them get into the schools of their dreams. And that's something that I really love. That's something that makes it all worthwhile. I would love to show you all the things that we've built here at Ready For to help you get into your top programs as well. So if you're interested in our courses, but you still want more information, I recommend signing up for a free consultation. During that time, I can share different resources with you. We could talk about scheduling. We could talk about your study plan. We could talk about your strengths and your weaknesses. Or if you just want to hear more about our instructors, our courses, and the best plan that will fit your needs, I recommend signing up for one of these consultations. It can be 15 minutes. I'm going to send an email tomorrow. It's going to have a link to this that you can set up a meeting with me. And I've helped a ton of students this way. So I would love to talk a little bit more with you as well if you have questions. Okay, make sure that you take advantage of both our verbal and our quant webinars. Thank you guys so much for attending today. We really appreciated spending the time with you. We would love to see you in one of our courses. If there's anything else I can do, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to stay after for a few minutes and answer some more questions. But other than that, best of luck, everyone. Good luck preparing for your GMAT.